School bullies were completely unaware that the new transferred black student was a brutal fighter. The first thing Quincy Evans noticed about Crest Hill Academy wasn't the marble floors or the gold-framed portraits of distinguished alumni lining the hallways. It wasn't even the way every student seemed to carry themselves like they owned the world, which, considering their parents' bank accounts, they probably did. No, what caught Quincy's attention was the sound his uncle's mop bucket made as it rolled across those pristine floors at exactly 7:15 a.m., 15 minutes before the first bell. The steady squeak roll echoed through the empty corridors like a heartbeat, and Quincy found himself walking in rhythm with it as he made his way to his first class. "Quincy! Boy, what are you doing here so early?" Uncle Lyra's voice boomed from behind a custodial cart loaded with cleaning supplies. At 52, Leroy Evans still had the build of the army sergeant he used to be: broad shoulders, straight back, and hands that could probably crush a soda can without breaking a sweat. "Couldn't sleep," Quincy replied, adjusting the straps of his second-hand backpack. "Figured I'd get here early, maybe find my classes before the chaos starts." Lyra chuckled, but his eyes held a hint of concern. "You sure you're ready for this place? These kids, they're different from what you're used to back in Detroit." Quincy looked around at the oak-paneled walls and crystal chandeliers. Everything screamed money, old money, new money, and the kind of money that bought silence when needed. "I'll be fine, Uncle Lee. Besides, someone's gotta keep an eye on you, make sure you're not getting into trouble with all these fancy folks. Boy, I've been cleaning these halls for 12 years. If I was gonna get in trouble, it would have happened by now." Lyra's smile faded slightly. "Just remember what I taught you about keeping your head down and your eyes open." Before Quincy could respond, the sound of expensive shoes clicking against marble announced the arrival of the first wave of students. Quincy gave his uncle a quick nod and disappeared into the crowd, but not before catching the way some of the early arrivals looked at Leroy, not with cruelty, exactly, but with the kind of invisible dismissal that somehow felt worse. By 9:30 a.m., Quincy had learned 3 important things about Crest Hill Academy. First, every classroom had a coffee machine that probably cost more than his uncle's monthly salary. Second, the Wi-Fi password was Excellence 2025. And apparently, everyone was expected to have the latest iPhone to access the school's digital ecosystem. Third, news traveled faster than wildfire in a place where everyone knew everyone else's business going back 3 generations. "Isn't that the janitor's nephew?" The whisper came from somewhere behind Quincy as he sat in advanced chemistry, trying to focus on Mr. Henderson's explanation of molecular bonds. "No way. Which janitor?" "Evans. You know, the big guy with the cart. He's been here forever." "Oh my God, that's actually hilarious. What's he doing in AP classes?" Quincy's pen stopped moving across his notebook. He'd heard whispers before, about his clothes, thrift store specials, his shoes, clean but obviously worn, and his lunch, packed in a brown bag instead of purchased from the gourmet cafeteria. But something about the tone in their voices when they mentioned Uncle Leroy made his jaw tighten. He turned slightly and caught sight of the speakers, 2 girls with perfectly styled blonde hair and matching Tiffany bracelets. They weren't looking at him with malice, just curiosity. Like he was an interesting specimen they'd discovered in a petri dish. "Eyes front, Mr. Evans," Mr. Henderson called out, not unkindly. "I assume you're following along?" "Yes, sir." Quincy turned back to his notes, but he could feel 20 pairs of eyes studying him like he was part of the day's experiment. By lunch, the whispers had evolved into something more organized. Quincy sat alone at a corner table in the massive cafeteria, methodically eating the turkey sandwich Uncle Leroy had packed for him that morning. The room buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the gentle clink of actual silverware, because of course Crest Hill Academy didn't use plastic forks. Well. If it isn't Mop Jr. The voice came from directly above him. Quincy looked up to see a tall, athletic guy with perfectly tousled brown hair and a smile that probably melted hearts and opened trust funds in equal measure. His Letterman jacket identified him as Brett Langston, quarterback, and the small crowd of admirers flanking him suggested he was exactly the kind of person who ruled places like this. "I'm sorry." Quincy kept his voice level, though every muscle in his body had suddenly gone tense. "Mop Jr., Brett repeated louder this time. "You know, because your uncle's the janitor? Man mops the floors, so you're like Mop Jr., get it?" A few kids at nearby tables turned to watch. Some looked uncomfortable, others seemed eager for entertainment. Brett's crew, 2 other football players and a girl who looked like she belonged on magazine covers, snickered appreciatively. "His name is Mr. Evans," Quincy said quietly. "And my name is Quincy." "Ooh, Mr. Evans," Brett said in a mock formal tone. "So fancy. Hey, does he teach you how to clean toilets at home? Is that like a family business?" Quincy's sandwich suddenly tasted like cardboard. He set it down carefully, his hands moving with deliberate precision. "Is there something you needed?" "Just being friendly." Brett shrugged. "Welcome to Crest Hill and all that. Though I gotta say, it's pretty cool that your uncle works here. Must be nice having the inside scoop on where all the good janitors' closets are." More laughter from his crew. Quincy noticed that other conversations in the cafeteria had quieted, the way they do when people sense drama brewing. "Must be nice having Daddy buy your way into everything," Quincy replied, his voice still calm but carrying just enough edge to make Brett's smile falter. The cafeteria went dead silent. Brett's jaw tightened. "What did you just say?" Quincy looked up at him steadily. "I said what I said." For a moment, it seemed like Brett might do something that would get him suspended. His friends certainly looked ready for it. But then his smile returned, colder this time. "You know what, Mop Jr.? I like you. You've got spirit." Brett clapped Quincy on the shoulder, squeezing just hard enough to make his point. "We should definitely hang out more." As Brett's crew walked away, Quincy heard him say to his friends, just loud enough to carry, "This is gonna be fun." Quincy sat there for the remaining 20 minutes of lunch, finishing his sandwich bite by bite while students stole glances at him. Some looked sympathetic, others looked like they were watching a car accident in slow motion. When the bell rang, Quincy gathered his things and headed to his locker. He moved through the hallways with the same measured pace he'd maintained all day, but anyone watching closely might have noticed something different about the way he carried himself, the way his eyes tracked movement in his peripheral vision, the way his shoulders stayed relaxed despite the tension crackling around him. At his locker, Quincy found a sticky note that simply read, "Hope you know how to clean up messes, you're gonna make a lot of them." He crumpled it up, tossed it in a nearby trash can, and headed to his afternoon classes. But as he walked, Quincy found himself thinking about the old garage behind Uncle Lyra's house, about the heavy bag hanging from the rafters and the way his hands felt when they were wrapped in tape instead of holding textbooks. These kids had no idea who they were messing with. But then again, neither did Quincy. Not yet. The smell hit Quincy before he even reached his locker the next morning. Bleach mixed with something sour and rotten, so strong it made his eyes water. As he rounded the corner, he found a small crowd gathered around locker 247, his locker, watching custodial staff mop up a puddle of murky water that had seeped under the metal door and spread across the pristine hallway floor. "Sorry about this, son," said Mrs. Rodriguez from maintenance, wringing out her mop. "Someone made quite a mess. We'll have it cleaned up in a few minutes." Quincy pulled his combination lock, and dirty water came pouring out like a broken dam. The smell intensified, mop water mixed with bleach and what looked like cafeteria leftovers. His textbooks floated in the toxic soup, pages swollen and ink bleeding together like watercolors in the rain. "Dude, that's disgusting," someone muttered from the crowd. "Who would do something like this?" asked a girl with genuine concern. But Quincy already knew. He could see Brett Langston down the hall, leaning against his own pristine locker, watching the scene with barely contained amusement. When their eyes met, Brett raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "Looks like someone's got a leak problem," Brett called out, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe Mop Jr. should ask his uncle for some cleaning tips." A few kids laughed nervously. Most just stared. Quincy felt his hands curl into fists at his sides, but he forced them open. He knelt down and started pulling out his soggy belongings, piece by piece, while Mrs. Rodriguez apologized over and over. "It's not your fault," Quincy told her quietly. "Thank you for cleaning it up." The crowd dispersed as the first bell rang, but Quincy remained crouched by his locker, holding the remains of his chemistry textbook. The pages fell apart in his hands like wet tissue paper. 3 months of notes, gone. His calculus homework, due next period, destroyed. He felt someone watching him and looked up to find a girl with short red hair and concerned green eyes. She held out a stack of paper towels. She said. "This is really messed up." "Thanks." Quincy accepted the towels and started dabbing at the least damaged of his books. Quincy. "I know." Maya crouched down beside him. "Look, Brett's an ass, but he's also connected. His dad's on the board, his mom runs the Alumni Association. If you report this..." "I'm not reporting anything." Quincy's voice was flat. "I'm just cleaning up." Maya studied his face. "You're different than I expected." "What did you expect?" "I don't know." "More angry?" Quincy almost smiled at that. If only she knew. By Thursday, the pranks had escalated. Salt in his water bottle during pee. His backpack mysteriously moved to different locations throughout the day. Anonymous notes in his textbooks with crude drawings and suggestions about where his uncle should stick his mop. But it was during Friday's morning assembly that Brett crossed a line even Quincy hadn't seen coming. Principal Davies was halfway through his weekly announcements when a student burst through the auditorium doors, shouting, "Emergency in the East Wing! Custodial emergency!" All heads turned as Uncle Leroy appeared, looking confused and carrying his radio. "I didn't get any emergency call," he said to Principal Davies. "Mr. Evans, there's been a report of flooding in the computer lab." The student, one of Brett's football buddies, said urgently. "They need you right away." Uncle Leroy jogged toward the door, his keys jangling. That's when it happened. Brett, sitting in the front row, had positioned his foot just right. As Uncle Leroy passed, Brett's leg shot out, catching the older man's ankle. Uncle Leroy went down hard, his keys scattering across the floor with a sound like breaking glass. The auditorium erupted in gasps, then nervous laughter from some students. Brett immediately jumped up, the picture of concern. "Oh my God, Mr. Evans! I'm so sorry! Are you okay?" "I was just stretching my leg. I didn't see you coming." Uncle Leroy pushed himself up slowly, his face flushed with embarrassment. I'm fine," he muttered, gathering his scattered keys while 800 students watched. Quincy sat frozen in his seat, his vision going red around the edges. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair so tightly he could feel the plastic starting to crack. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to move, to act, to make Brett pay for that humiliation. But Uncle Leroy's voice echoed in his memory. "Discipline isn't about never getting angry, Quincy. It's about choosing what to do with that anger." So Quincy sat. He watched his uncle collect his dignity along with his keys. He heard the whispers and suppressed giggles around him. And he stayed in his seat until the assembly ended and he could disappear into the crowd. That afternoon, Quincy skipped his last 2 classes and went home early. The old garage behind Uncle Leroy's house smelled like motor oil and determination. The heavy bag hanging from the rafters had seen better days, duct tape holding splits together, the leather worn smooth in places from years of impact. Quincy wrapped his hands carefully, the ritual as familiar as breathing. His parents had died when he was 8, a car accident on a rainy Tuesday that changed everything. Uncle Leroy had taken him in without question, this giant of a man who'd served 2 tours overseas and come home to find purpose in raising someone else's son. "Your daddy was my little brother," Leroy had told him that first night. "That makes you my boy now. And my boys know how to protect themselves and the people they love." The training had started simple, basic self-defense, discipline, respect. But as Quincy grew, so did the complexity of what Uncle Leroy taught him. hand-to-hand combat techniques learned in military training, pressure points and leverage, how to end a fight before it really began. The strongest people I know never had to prove it, Uncle Leroy would say. Real strength is choosing not to use what you've got unless you absolutely have to. Quincy unleashed a combination on the heavy bag, jab, cross, hook, uppercut, that would have dropped most people instantly. The bag swayed under the attack, and he followed it with an elbow strike that echoed through the garage like a gunshot. He was stronger now than Uncle Leroy probably realized. Faster too. Years of training had given him reflexes that bordered on dangerous and a knowledge of human anatomy that could turn his hands into weapons. But as he unwrapped his hands and headed inside for dinner, Quincy wondered how much longer he could keep choosing discipline over justice. Because something told him Brett Langston wasn't done yet. And neither was he. Monday morning P at Crest Hill Academy was supposed to be civilized. While other schools made kids run laps around the track or dodge flying volleyballs, Coach Martinez had transformed the gymnasium into something resembling a country club fitness center. Wrestling mats covered half the floor, weight machines gleamed along the walls, and classical music played softly from hidden speakers. Gentlemen, today we're working on basic self-defense, Coach Martinez announced to the assembled class. Partner up and practice the holds I demonstrated. Quincy found himself paired with a nervous sophomore named Tyler who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They were working through a simple escape technique when Brett's voice cut through the ambient noise. Hey coach, I think Mop Jr. needs a real partner. Tyler's gonna break if you look at him wrong. Coach Martinez glanced over. Everyone stays with their assigned partners, Langston. Come on, coach. Look at him. Brett gestured toward Quincy, who was helping Tyler adjust his stance. The guy's been taking hits all week. Don't you think he should learn to hit back? A small crowd began to gather, that familiar electricity of impending drama crackling through the air. Quincy felt their eyes on him but kept working with Tyler, showing him how to break free from a wrist grab. That's not what this class is about, Coach Martinez said firmly. We're learning control and discipline, not. I'm just saying. Brett interrupted, stepping closer to the mat where Quincy and Tyler were practicing. If someone's gonna survive in the real world, they need to know how to handle themselves. Right, Mop Jr.? Quincy finally looked up. I'm fine with my partner, thanks. Are you though? Brett's smile was sharp as a knife. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been letting people walk all over you. Your locker, your books, your... Brett. Coach Martinez's voice carried a warning. Back to your partner. But Brett was already on the mat, his crew forming a loose circle around them. One quick demonstration, coach. Show everyone that Crest Hill boys can handle themselves. I said no. Quincy stood up, pulling Tyler behind him protectively. Why not? Brett spread his arms wide, playing to his audience. Scared you might embarrass yourself? Or embarrass your uncle? The gymnasium went dead quiet. Even the classical music seemed to fade into background whisper. Quincy's voice came out steady, controlled. Leave my uncle out of this. Your uncle? Brett laughed, loud and theatrical. The guy who can't even walk through an assembly without tripping over his own feet. Something cold and dangerous flickered behind Quincy's eyes, but he remained motionless. Brett, that's enough. Coach Martinez stepped forward. Everyone back to your partners, now. But Brett wasn't finished. You know what? Maybe I should go find Mr. Evans right now. See if he needs help avoiding any more accidents. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Uncle Leroy appeared in the gymnasium doorway. He was making his routine equipment check, clipboard in one hand, mop handle in the other, completely unaware of the tension thick as smoke in the air. Speak of the devil. Brett muttered, then raised his voice. Hey, Mr. Evans! Perfect timing! Uncle Leroy looked up, confused. Everything all right in here? Oh, everything's great, Brett said, walking toward the door. Just having a little conversation with your nephew about family traditions. What happened next occurred so fast that most witnesses would later struggle to explain the sequence of events. Brett, still talking, casually extended the mop handle as Uncle Leroy passed by, creating what looked like an innocent obstacle. But Quincy saw it for what it was, another deliberate humiliation designed to make his uncle fall in front of a crowd. This time, Quincy moved. He covered the distance between himself and Brett in 3 fluid steps. His first move wasn't even a strike, just a simple redirect of Brett's extended arm that sent the quarterback stumbling sideways. But when Brett recovered and threw a wild punch, Quincy's training took over completely. The first technique was a textbook arm drag that used Brett's own momentum against him, spinning the bigger boy around and off balance. Before Brett could recover, Quincy's palm struck him precisely between the shoulder blades, a pressure point Uncle Leroy had taught him that temporarily disrupted nerve signals. Brett's legs gave out instantly. "What the hell?" One of Brett's friends lunged forward, only to find himself on his back 3 seconds later courtesy of a hip toss that looked almost gentle until he hit the mat with bone-jarring force. The third attacker, smarter than his friends, tried to grab Quincy from behind. Quincy dropped his center of gravity, threw his hips back, and sent the kid flying over his shoulder in a perfect judo throw that landed him in a groaning heap next to his buddies. Total elapsed time, 8 seconds. The gymnasium was so quiet you could hear sneakers squeaking on polished floors 3 hallways away. 30 students stood frozen, mouths open, trying to process what they just witnessed. Coach Martinez stood with his whistle halfway to his lips, looking like he'd just seen someone walk on water. Brett groaned and tried to push himself up, his face red with embarrassment and confusion. His 2 friends lay motionless, not unconscious but definitely reconsidering their life choices. Quincy stood in the center of the mat, breathing normally, looking like he just finished a casual warm-up rather than dismantling 3 opponents with surgical precision. His eyes found Uncle Leroy, who was staring at his nephew with a mixture of pride and concern. "Quincy!" Coach Martinez finally found his voice. But Quincy was already moving. He picked up his towel from the sideline, slung it over his shoulder, and walked toward the exit. He didn't look back, didn't acknowledge the stunned whispers beginning to ripple through the crowd, didn't even seem to notice the way every single person in that gym was now looking at him like they'd never seen him before. As he reached the door, Uncle Leroy caught his eye. Quincy gave him the smallest nod, the same gesture they'd shared 1,000 times in the garage behind their house. Message received. Message delivered. By lunch, the story had grown into legend. Principal Davies' coffee had gone cold 20 minutes ago, but he couldn't stop replaying the video on his laptop screen. 8 seconds of footage that had somehow managed to turn his pristine institution into the epicenter of a social media storm. The knock on his office door came at exactly 8:15 a.m., just as he'd expected. "Come in." Mrs. Langston entered first, her Hermes heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. Behind her loomed her husband, Charles Langston III, whose family name graced both the school's library and his son's trust fund. Their faces carried the particular brand of fury that only came from having their carefully constructed world disrupted. "Davies." Charles didn't bother with pleasantries. "I assume you've seen the footage." "Multiple times," Principal Davies replied carefully. "I've also seen the comments. And the news reports. And the calls from 3 different television stations." Mrs. Langston placed her phone on the desk, the screen displaying a Twitter notification. "Video of prep school fight goes viral, 2.3 million views and climbing. This is unacceptable," she said, her voice tight with controlled rage. "That boy attacked our son unprovoked. He's clearly unstable, possibly dangerous. I want him expelled immediately." Principal Davies pulled up another tab on his laptop. "The surveillance footage from the gymnasium shows a different story, Mrs. Langston. Your son initiated physical contact. Multiple witnesses confirm he deliberately tried to trip Mr. Evans, Quincy's uncle." "So?" Charles leaned forward. "Boys will be boys. But that display of violence? That's not normal teenage behavior. That's trained aggression." What Charles Langston didn't know, what none of them knew yet, was that the video had already traveled far beyond Crest Hill Academy's marble walls. A sophomore named David Chin, tired of watching bullies target anyone who didn't fit their mold, had quietly uploaded the gym footage to TikTok at 11:47 p.m. the night before. By morning, it had exploded across every social platform imaginable. The comments told the real story. Finally, someone stood up to these rich bullies. That technique though, kids got skills. Private school bros got what they deserved. Anyone know who this kid is? He's a legend. Plot twist, the quiet kid was John Wick all along. But it wasn't just random internet users taking notice. Local news stations had picked up the story. Blogs were analyzing the fight frame by frame. Someone had even created a slow-motion breakdown of Quincy's techniques, calling it poetry in motion. Principal Davies cleared his throat. There's something else you need to know. The story has been picked up by the Detroit Free Press. They're calling it a case study in institutional bullying and social inequality. Mrs. Langston's face went pale. What exactly are they saying? That a scholarship student defended his family's dignity against systematic harassment from privileged students. Davies turned his laptop around so they could see the headline. Janitor's nephew becomes viral hero after standing up to elite school bullies. Charles Langston's jaw worked silently for several seconds. This is a disaster. Our family's reputation will survive. Principal Davies interrupted. But only if we handle this correctly. The emergency board meeting that afternoon felt more like a council than an educational administrative session. 12 of the most influential families in the state sat around a conference table, their combined net worth probably exceeding most small countries' GDP. The boy has to go, declared Harrison Mills, whose pharmaceutical empire had funded the school's new science wing. We can't have students thinking violence is acceptable. The footage is everywhere, countered Dr. Sarah Kim, the only board member who'd actually watched the video more than once. If we expel him now, it looks like we're protecting the bullies and punishing the victim. Victim? Mrs. Langston's voice reached a pitch that could shatter crystal. My son is in the nurse's office with a concussion. Your son has a bruised ego and a sore back. Dr. Kim replied coolly. The Evans boy used minimal force to neutralize 3 attackers. If anything, he showed remarkable restraint. The debate continued for 2 hours, growing more heated with each passing minute. Finally, Charles Langston played his trump card. The janitor goes, he announced. Leroy Evans is terminated immediately. That eliminates the problem and sends a clear message about consequences. The room fell silent. Principal Davies felt something cold settle in his stomach. Charles, you can't. I can and I will. My family has donated over $2 million to this institution. Mr. Evans is an at-will employee. Consider it done. That's when the secretary knocked. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said nervously. But there's a student here who insists on speaking to the board. He says it's urgent. Quincy Evans stepped into the conference room like he owned it. He wasn't wearing his usual thrift store clothes. Instead, he had on a simple black suit that fit him perfectly, a crisp white shirt, and a tie that probably cost more than most students' monthly allowances. His hair was freshly cut, his shoes polished to a mirror shine. But it was his eyes that made the room go quiet. They held the same calm intensity he'd shown in the gymnasium, but now there was something else, calculation. Good afternoon, Quincy said politely, setting a manila folder on the conference table. I believe you were discussing my uncle's employment status. Charles Langston found his voice first. Young man, this is a private meeting. You have no business. Actually, I do. Quincy opened the folder and withdrew a single sheet of paper. This is a copy of the employment contract Crest Hill Academy signed with my uncle 12 years ago. Section 7B specifically states that termination requires just cause and due process. Principal Davies stared at the teenager. Where did you get that? I asked for it. Public records request. Amazing what you can learn when you actually read the fine print. Quincy placed another document on the table. This is a statement from 17 students who witnessed the systematic harassment my uncle and I have endured over the past month. All willing to testify if needed. Mrs. Langston's voice came out as a whisper. "What do you want?" Quincy reached into his pocket and withdrew a USB drive, setting it beside the other documents with deliberate precision. "That contains the original gymnasium footage, plus security camera recordings from the hallway incidents involving my locker. It also has audio recordings of the threats and harassment." His voice remained perfectly calm. "Copies have been sent to the Detroit Free Press, the ACLU, and 3 law firms that specialize in civil rights cases." The silence in the room was deafening. "Here's what's going to happen," Quincy continued, his tone conversational. "My uncle keeps his job, with a formal apology from the administration. Brett Langston faces appropriate disciplinary action. And this school implements a real anti-bullying policy that actually protects students instead of just protecting reputations." Charles Langston half rose from his chair. "You little..." "Or," Quincy continued smoothly, "I walk away from Crest Hill Academy, and every media outlet in the country gets to hear about how a prestigious private school tried to fire a decorated veteran for the crime of having a nephew who refused to be bullied." He straightened his tie and picked up his folder. "The choice is yours. But I'd decide quickly. The press conference is scheduled for 6 o'clock. Quincy Evans walked out of that conference room the same way he'd walked out of the gymnasium, without looking back. But this time, he was smiling. 1 week later, Crest Hill Academy looked exactly the same on the surface. Same marble floors, same gold-framed portraits, same students carrying themselves like royalty. But something fundamental had shifted in the air, like the atmospheric pressure change before a storm breaks. Quincy noticed it first in the small things. Maya Chin no longer ate lunch alone. She'd somehow become the unofficial leader of a growing group of students who'd previously been invisible. David Chin, the sophomore who'd uploaded the video, walked the halls with his head up instead of hunched over his phone. Even Tyler, Quincy's nervous PE partner, had stopped apologizing for taking up space. "Morning, Quincy," Mrs. Rodriguez called out as he passed her in the hallway. She was polishing the trophy case with obvious pride, and Quincy realized he'd never heard her voice sound so confident before. "Morning, Mrs. Rodriguez. How's everything going?" "Better," she said simply, but her smile spoke volumes. "Much better." The Respect and Dignity Initiative banners had appeared 3 days ago, hanging from every pillar and doorway like colorful surrender flags. Principal Davies had personally announced the new program during Monday morning's assembly, his voice carrying the particular tone of a man who'd learned to choose his battles very carefully. What made it almost laughably ironic was how the administration had somehow transformed Quincy from a problem to be solved into a success story to be celebrated. The same kid they'd wanted to quietly expel had become the poster child for their new anti-bullying campaign. "It's all about creating an environment where every student feels valued," Principal Davies had explained to the local news crew that Tuesday. "Young Mr. Evans represents exactly the kind of character and integrity we strive to foster at Crest Hill Academy." Quincy had watched the interview from Uncle Lyra's maintenance closet, shaking his head while his uncle chuckled softly behind him. 12 years I've been here," Uncle Lyra had said, organizing his cleaning supplies with military precision. "And suddenly they discover they've always valued character and integrity. Funny how that works." But the real changes weren't in the banners or the press releases. They were in the way students moved through the hallways now, less like predators and prey, more like people who actually went to school together. The way teachers seemed to notice students they'd previously overlooked. The way conversations had replaced whispers in the cafeteria. Brett Langston's absence helped, of course. His 2-week suspension had created a power vacuum that no one seemed eager to fill. His usual crew had scattered like leaves, suddenly finding interests in everything from debate club to volunteer tutoring. "You realize you're famous now, right?" Maya asked during lunch on Thursday, sliding her tray across from Quincy's usual corner table. She'd been joining him most days, along with David and a rotating group of students who seemed drawn to whatever quiet magnetism Quincy carried. "Famous isn't the word I'd use," Quincy replied, unwrapping the sandwich Uncle Leroy had packed. "Turkey and Swiss, same as always, but somehow it tasted different when he wasn't eating it alone. 3 million views on TikTok, interviews with 2 different news stations, and someone started a hashtag called #MopJuniorHero. I'd call that famous. I'd call that ridiculous. But Quincy was almost smiling as he said it. David looked up from his calculus homework. My older brother goes to University of Michigan. He says kids there are talking about you. They're calling it the Crest Hill Uprising. Now you're all just being dramatic. Are we though? Maya leaned forward. When's the last time you saw someone get stuffed in a locker? Or heard anyone make fun of the custodial staff? Or watched a teacher ignore obvious bullying? Quincy considered this. She had a point. The ecosystem of casual cruelty that had defined Crest Hill Academy seemed to have quietly evaporated, replaced by something that almost resembled actual community. Friday morning brought an unexpected summons to Principal Davies' office. Quincy found the man looking considerably more relaxed than he had a week ago, though there were new lines around his eyes that suggested the stress had simply moved rather than disappeared. Quincy, please sit. Davies gestured to the leather chair across from his desk. I have a proposition for you. Sir? Our monthly assembly is this afternoon. I'd like you to speak to the student body. Nothing elaborate, just a few words about respect, about standing up for what's right. About the changes we've all witnessed this week. Quincy studied the principal's face. You want me to be your poster child. I want you to be yourself. Davies replied carefully. The students will listen to you in a way they won't listen to me. You've earned something I can't buy or demand, their respect. That afternoon, 800 students filed into the auditorium with the restless energy of teenagers forced to sit still on a Friday. But when Principal Davies introduced Quincy, the room went silent with genuine attention rather than polite obligation. Quincy walked to the podium with the same measured pace he'd carried since his first day at Crest Hill. He adjusted the microphone, looked out at the sea of faces, some curious, some admiring, some still skeptical, and began to speak. A week ago, most of you knew me as Mop Jr., he said, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium. Some of you probably still think of me that way. That's fine. Names don't really matter. He paused, his eyes finding familiar faces in the crowd. Maya giving him an encouraging nod. David with his phone out, probably recording. Tyler sitting up straighter than Quincy had ever seen him. What matters is this: some people fight with fists. I fight to make sure my family never gets stepped on again. And if that means your family too, your friends, the people who make this place work every single day, then that's a fight worth having. The applause started slowly, just a few scattered claps, then built into something that filled the auditorium like thunder. Students stood up, teachers joined in, and for a moment the rigid social hierarchy that had defined Crest Hill Academy for generations seemed to dissolve entirely. Quincy didn't smile at the ovation. Instead, he looked toward the back of the auditorium, where Uncle Leroy stood in his maintenance uniform, tears streaming down his weathered face, pride radiating from every line of his body. Quincy gave him the smallest nod, the same gesture they'd shared 1,000 times, but somehow different now. This time, it meant, we did it. We're still here. And we're not going anywhere. Uncle Leroy nodded back, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. In that moment, surrounded by applause and respect, Quincy Evans finally felt like he was exactly where he belonged. 3 months after the assembly that changed everything, Quincy Evans arrived at school to find 17 students waiting for him in the East Wing gymnasium. They stood in a loose semicircle around the wrestling mats, an unlikely collection of personalities that would have never occupied the same space in the old Crest Hill Academy. There was Maya, of course, her red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. David Chin stood beside his new girlfriend Sarah, both of them having blossomed from invisible wallflowers into confident young leaders. Tyler had brought his younger sister Emma, a freshman who'd heard stories about the Crest Hill Uprising from her friends. Even Marcus Williams was there, a former member of Brett's crew who'd quietly distanced himself from the football royalty after watching how quickly loyalty disappeared when the cameras started rolling. "Morning, everyone," Quincy said, setting down his duffel bag. Before we start, let's review the rules. It had become a ritual, these rules. Not because anyone needed reminding, but because words had power, and these particular words had become something like scripture for the group that had formed around Quincy's quiet leadership. Rule 1. Maya called out, and the others joined in. Respect yourself. Rule 2. Respect others. Rule 3. Strength without restraint is just violence. Rule 4. We protect those who can't protect themselves. Rule 5. The mat doesn't lie, but it doesn't judge either. Quincy nodded approvingly. Rule 6. What we learn here stays here, but how we live here goes everywhere. The Crest Hill Self-Defense Club had started accidentally. 2 weeks after his assembly speech, Quincy had found Tyler being cornered by a group of 8th graders from the middle school, new bullies trying to fill the vacuum left by Brett's suspended crew. Instead of handling it himself, Quincy had quietly taught Tyler 3 simple techniques: how to stand, how to project confidence, and how to escape a grab without causing injury. Word had spread the way word always spreads in schools, through whispered conversations and carefully passed notes. Soon Quincy was fielding requests from students who wanted to learn not just how to fight, but how to carry themselves with the quiet confidence he'd somehow mastered. Principal Davies had initially been skeptical. The last thing we need is students thinking violence is the solution to everything, he'd said during their meeting about making the club official. It's not about violence, Quincy had replied. It's about choice. Right now, some kids feel like they don't have any choices. I want to give them options that don't involve getting hurt or hurting someone else. Now, 3 months later, the club met twice a week and had a waiting list. Not because students wanted to learn how to fight, but because they wanted to learn how to be strong without being cruel. How to stand up without putting others down. How to command respect through integrity rather than fear. Partner up, Quincy instructed. Today we're working on situational awareness. The best fight is the one you never have to have. As the students began practicing, Quincy caught sight of a familiar figure mopping the hallway outside the gymnasium. Uncle Leroy moved with the same methodical precision he'd always had, but there was something different in his posture now, a straightness to his spine that spoke of a man who no longer had to make himself invisible. The change in how students treated Uncle Leroy had been one of the most surprising aftereffects of everything that had happened. Where once they'd looked through him like furniture, now they actively greeted him. Students held doors open. They said thank you when he cleaned their classrooms. Some even stopped to ask about his day. Your nephew's doing good work in there, a voice said behind Quincy. He turned to find Coach Martinez watching the practice session with obvious approval. They're learning more than just self-defense. That's the idea, Quincy replied. Uncle Leroy always said the strongest people he knew never had to prove it. Smart man, your uncle. After practice ended and the students dispersed, Quincy made his way to the janitor's closet on the 2nd floor. It was a small space that most people hurried past without thinking, filled with mops and cleaning supplies and the persistent smell of pine sol that had become as familiar as his uncle's cologne. But now it was something else too. Over the past months, Quincy had quietly transformed one wall into a gallery of inspiration. Photos and quotes from people who'd understood that real strength came from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. A picture of Rosa Parks, with her quote, "You must never be fearful about what you are doing when it is right." Muhammad Ali. "Service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth." Maya Angelou. "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you." And at the center, a photo Uncle Leroy had given him, a young soldier in army fatigues, standing proud beside a tank. On the back, in faded ink, Leroy Evans, 1995. Some serve in uniform, some serve in overalls. All service matters. Admiring your wall of fame? Quincy turned to find Uncle Leroy filling the doorway, his maintenance cart parked in the hallway behind him. Just thinking, Quincy replied, about how everything started here. In this closet, with mop buckets and pine sol. Uncle Leroy smiled, stepping into the small space that had somehow become sacred ground for both of them. You know what I learned in the army? The foundation is always the most important part of any structure. Doesn't matter how pretty the building looks, if the foundation's weak, the whole thing comes down. He gestured around the closet, at the humble tools and supplies that kept Crest Hill Academy functioning. This might be the lowest level in the whole school, but it's also where everything starts. Clean floors, clear minds. Simple work, honest work. Quincy nodded, understanding. And real strength. Real strength. Uncle Leroy agreed. The kind that doesn't need to prove itself because it's too busy holding everyone else up. As they stood together in that small closet surrounded by mops and memories, Quincy realized that this was his legacy, not the viral video, or the news interviews, or even the respect he'd earned from his classmates. It was this, the knowledge that strength came from service, that dignity was earned through integrity, and that sometimes the most important battles were fought not with fists, but with the quiet determination to never let anyone make you smaller than you were meant to be. The janitor's closet still smelled like pine sol and old memories. But now it also smelled like possibility, like the kind of change that started from the ground up and reached all the way to the top. Because in these halls, Quincy had learned, the floor really was the lowest level. But it was also where real strength began. The end.